go there if you don't mind, or however, but I don't want to hit a lull. I want to squeeze as much info out of Andy as we can while we have him. All right, and we are recording. Excellent. So thank you again for joining. So my first question for CTA, and I think we all basically know, but could you describe for us what you think the CTA exam encompasses, shows about you when you're ready, body of knowledge you need to know, just paint a wide picture of the CTA exam. I've got the triangle as my background for my desktop. And have had that there for a while of the exams. I see the stuff like the B2C exam come up and go, well, that's me, and that's okay. So tell us CTA and help us differentiate from the others out there, please.
Sure, absolutely. So I think that the CTA is a recognition. Remember, it's a credential, not a role, right? So it's a recognition that you have a broad knowledge base of the Salesforce platform. And I would lump in that even though the B2C stuff is not directly part of the CTA pyramid, you need to know some of it. There's a lot of areas where there will be things that you have to go super deep on. So I would classify that as the core platform. So what used to be called Force.com is really the focus of this particular certification, with all the ancillary Salesforce products around it. You need to know some part of it. So it's not necessarily that you can open up Marketing Cloud and go deep in writing AMP script or something like that, but you need to know what the capabilities are and how it could fit into an overall solution if you were given a scenario that might need that. So whereas the new B2C and B2B architecture certifications are going to be more focused on those specific scenarios, think of CTA as the platform overall. So, and extremely technical, extremely technical.
And I just got the note from Dan. We forgot to introduce you. Would you mind telling? It's like, I know you. I used to work for you. Would you mind telling everybody who you are, what you do, and your relationship to the CTA?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am Andy Ognenoff. I have been in the Salesforce ecosystem for almost 16 years now. Started off as a solo admin at a restaurant company for 30 users, and I am now the North America CTO of the Salesforce practice at Accenture, the largest Salesforce partner out there. Been a CTA for the past 6 years now, and I have helped build our CTA development program at Accenture, as well as acting as an advisor for the Trailhead certification team around the CTA certification and the related domain architecture certifications, helping do tech reviews and author some of those exams over the past couple of years, as well as help teach the CTA 601 class. So that's a little bit about me.
Excellent. So total score for our group having access to you. So
absolutely.
I think people will continue to trickle in. We saw a big burst of people at about 11:15. There may be, is London calling going on right now? There may be another.
It was yesterday.
Was it yesterday? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I don't want to hog the mic. Anybody else have questions, or I will keep going down my list.
I can ask one. So there's lots of clouds. Would you say that this is while an architect obviously needs to have some knowledge of the various clouds and products out there, would CTA focus more heavily on sales and service, for example? Is that a fair?
So I don't know that I would say sales and service specifically. I would say the core platform. So sales and service sits on top of the core platform. So yes, absolutely, sales and service are going to be part of all of the various scenarios that you might come across. But it could encompass custom apps, it could encompass CPQ, it could encompass Health Cloud, Financial Services Cloud, etc. those are probably not going to be very likely answers for some of the scenarios that you're working on. They're really looking at core. So community cloud, sales cloud, service cloud, custom apps, and anything else that would sit on the platform, with the ancillary products around it, such as Heroku, MuleSoft, Marketing Cloud, all the various pieces, and non-Salesforce products too. So you may have AWS or Azure or GCP as part of your solution as well. Sometimes there's a document management solution that needs to be in play as well. App Exchange, that's a big one. Know when to use App Exchange and when not to.
Question. So is the answer always the Salesforce product, like they say?
No.
All right,
No.
tell us some more.
Yeah, so I think that as an architect, you need to have a good understanding about context. So the scenarios that you're going to come across specifically in the CTA exam are going to have, they're going to lean you towards Salesforce products, obviously. But as an architect, you're really working for the client, right? You're trying to figure out what is the best solution for whatever the given set of constraints you have. So you need to make assumptions and state them, and talk a little bit about the options that are available, and then justify whatever your answer is. So there is no requirement that you have to use a Salesforce product to solve for a particular requirement. Usually it's probably a good idea, if there is an option, to talk about that you know that there is an option in this space. And if you don't choose that solution, why not? So I think that the biggest thing that candidates struggle with on the CTA exam, besides communication, which I'm sure we'll get into in a minute, is they may know the right answer or an optimal answer, but they don't justify it. They don't have the backing to the judges on what the reasoning is for what your selection was. It could be that it's the only thing you know, and that's usually not the right answer if it's the only thing you know. It could be that you're trying to please the Salesforce AE and selling more licenses. That may or may not be the right answer, right? So you want to go after the solution both in the context of the exam as well as for real world client situations, whatever makes sense for the context and the constraints that you're thrown at in the scenario you're trying to solution for.
Can one of those answers be that these are the resources the client has, i.e. somebody with maybe limited Apex knowledge, so therefore we're not going to have a very expansive Apex solution, but we will instead, but they do have somebody on staff who knows how to use Flow or even Process Builder. So we're going to build a solution in Process Builder.
I'll say yes, as long as the constraints around the usage of whatever tool it is you're talking about don't preclude you from solving the rest of the requirements. So if there's a whole bunch of requirements that are large data volumes, massive integration, high volume user transactions, Process Builder probably isn't the right solution for that, even if that's the only kind of resource you have for managing the platform. So it really comes down to the overall solution, not a point solution. So they're going to give you a whole bunch of requirements to look at, like literally hundreds of requirements to look at. And you need to look at them in the context of all the requirements, not just each individual one.
Okay, globally exist.
Yeah, and I thought we were about to blur the lines a little bit here. The group we're putting together. This is a merger of a couple of different ideas. Basically, they don't let us do architect user groups yet. So there's dev, admin, marketing, B2C, but where this group is CTA and beyond. It's really to handle architecture concepts. We're sharing different architect levels, sharing tools to try and mature. I know Salesforce, but I may not know how to connect to anything outside of it or whether things may come into play. SSO being that first big one that people have to hit, that's becoming a primary for just about everything that, isn't. They weren't an organization wasn't born in Salesforce. They probably have a security practice somewhere and they want to link to that. And that being kind of a first a baby step out into the world of architecture and connectivity and having to deal with those types of things for baked in Salesforce professionals. So yeah, I was just going to say on the CTA exam, would that be something that you'd be given is, hey, the organization you're working with has no admins or they only have process builder. In my sample questions that I've seen, like the mocks that have gone around, now, again, they're only like 2-sentence ones, not hundreds. I didn't know that the list went that long. Is that something that you'd get thrown? Is that?
So the scenarios are requirements. They're not solutions. They may have, I mean, the mocks that are out there are fairly representative of the kind of requirements that you're going to see if the mocks you're talking about are the ones coming from Salesforce. So in the Trailblazer community, there's a architect success group that several of the official mock solution or mock exams are posted. That is very similar to the kind of scenarios that you're going to face. Usually they're going to be a little bit longer. They're usually 7 to 10 pages worth of background and requirements. And unless it's like a system that is going to need to stick around or they're giving you context on what is the current state and what their desired future state is, it's not likely going to be in a specific requirement, say you must use Process Builder or you must use Apex to handle this. They're going to give you the freedom as the architect to say, how do you interpret this requirement? And then what are the constraints and the assumptions that you're making about why you solutioned the way that you did? So you absolutely need to remember, don't just say why you're solving it a certain way. Sorry, not how you're solving it, but why you're solving it a certain way. So if you're going to use Process Builder, why? Is it because you only have resources that can do that? You don't have any pro coders, or it's that's where I was going with it. So that's just make sure to justify whatever it is that you're coming up with.
Can we take a step back and talk about high level, how the exam is structured and what it's like?
Yeah, absolutely. So from an exam perspective, you're going to get well, maybe let's talk about the structure. So we've gone through the prerequisites. So the prerequisites are all the domain designer exams. Personally, and at Accenture, we actually require more than what Salesforce requires for us to sponsor you to go to the review board. I don't think you can pass without having a knowledge of communities or Experience Cloud, sales and service. So we actually require admin, sales cloud consultant, service cloud consultant, community cloud consultant, and I'm sure we're going to be adding some more besides just the pyramid that Salesforce puts out, because so many of the scenarios are going to encompass those product areas as well. So from a prereq perspective, you get through all of the domain designer exams, and then a lot of people think that I'm ready to go. There's a big chunk of the pyramid that's not actually physically on the diagram between CTA and the application and system architect, and we like to call that experience. So if you haven't been doing the role of a technical architect on real projects for a long period of time, it's going to be very difficult for you to draw on just your book knowledge to be able to pass this exam. So let's assume that you have the experience, you have all the prereqs. When you go to the exam, you're going to get in today's world, you get 3 hours. Used to be 2 hours, and before that it was 75 minutes. Now you get 3 hours. It's virtual today. They are working on bringing things back in person. You're going to have a three-judge panel, that are existing CTAs. Usually it's going to be 2 Salesforce people and a partner, or it could be all Salesforce employees. And you're going to get 3 hours to solution a scenario that is 7 to 10 pages long. Usually it's going to be a couple of paragraphs of background information and then talk about the business processes, and it'll be in bullet point form. So just a bunch of requirements. And then at the end, it's usually structured where they'll talk about the sharing and visibility requirements, reporting requirements, and any governance and DevOps type requirements that might be in there, or challenges that the fictitious organization is going through and why you or what you should do to try to solve for some of those challenges. So 3 hours to solution a huge scenario, and then you get 45 minutes to present your solution to the judges. They are not going to talk to you. They're not going to give you facial expressions or ask questions or anything like that. And you can't ask questions either. You're just presenting to a wall, basically, for 45 minutes. And then after that, the tables are turned and the judges get to ask you questions for 40 minutes. And they can do anything they want. They can dig deep on a particular area that you talked about. They can point out a requirement that you missed and have you solution on the fly. They can change requirements on you to see how well you can react on the fly. That's usually fairly challenging if it's something that is related to the sharing model or the data model. But that's what they can do during that. And then after that, you go take a breath and wait a week or two to get your results.
Now, my understanding is that Q&A is to help get you to answers that you may have not have gotten to. Is that correct? Are they there to help lead you to water?
I will say, yes, the judges want you to pass. They're not going to ask you trick questions. They're not necessarily going to ask you leading questions, though. Some of them could be leading questions, but they're not supposed to do that. It's really meant to dig in to make sure that you actually understand all the concepts that you talked about in your presentation. So they're going to give you an opportunity to correct anything that maybe you said incorrectly or you forgot to talk about, you ran out of time or things like that. But there's only 40 minutes. So if you figure a minute or let's say 2 minutes per question, so that they can ask the question, you can think about it, you can respond to it, and they can ask any follow-ups, you're really talking about 20 questions that they can use to help you get to where you need to be. So you don't want to leave things to Q&A assuming that they're going to ask you questions about it, because if you don't talk about it, if you don't end up having time to talk about it during Q&A, you don't get any points. So it's really important that you cover everything in your presentation, and then they will drill in on some of the areas that you may have missed or they want clarification on, or maybe you did well and they just want to see how you react under pressure and they'll change stuff on you, or ask you to do random things like diagram OAuth flows or SAML flows, things like that.
Cool. So I would say, and I've had consulting groups, I've been on the customer side, and if after the first 45-minute meeting and 1 page of requirements, somebody delivered me a solution plan, I would probably fire them. If and it takes me weeks to come up and dozens of interviews to be able to have a solid solution that I feel comfortable enough saying, spend your money on this, this will help you. Do you need to couch? I mean, obviously exams are time limited, the CTA. Do you need to couch your answers with that kind of stuff, or do you just assume, a level of, it's okay to assume an answer and, be challenged on it and pull a variant out? Do you need to talk through that humility while you're there of, well, if I knew this, I would do this and this and this, otherwise that? Or do you just need to barrel forward and be confident? What's the game face that you should have on?
Yeah, so absolutely, you need to go in with confidence. You need to have the confidence in whatever solution you came up with. That said, don't try to fake it. So if you don't know something, it is better for you from a time management perspective specifically to say that you don't know something and move on. They won't ask more questions. If you say that you don't have zero experience with a particular topic area and there's something that is going to take you down a rabbit hole that you know you can't answer, it's better to just say, that's not an area that I have a ton of experience with. I know how I could get the answer. I would rely on these resources. That's better than trying to muddle your way through it and have them take up a whole bunch of precious time asking you questions that you know you're going to get wrong. Your point about assumptions, though, is critical. So as you go through the scenario, you are going to have questions about the background of the scenario that you're given. They intentionally don't give you all the information. So you, as an architect who have 8+ years of experience in the Salesforce ecosystem, should know what some of the things are that are missing. And you should make assumptions on it based on that experience. So, and state them. So as you're going through your presentation, you want to be saying, I am assuming that they have an IDP that is capable of doing SAML 2.0 because that's what Salesforce supports. So I'm going to assume that they have that, and we're going to take advantage of that today. If they don't, I would recommend Okta, Identity Connect, Ping Identity, whatever it is, right? So you need to have options in your back pocket in case your assumptions are incorrect, or maybe they're just going to change them on you. Like, I assumed that they had MuleSoft already, or they had a middleware tool already, and they don't. So what are you going to do? One thing I will say, do not assume the cheapest option. So money is not part of the equation here. So like, you shouldn't go and say, I'm going to use a platform license and I'm going to build a custom opportunity object because I don't have the money to pay for Sales Cloud licenses. Set aside the fact that that's against your MSA. They don't want to have money in the equation. If they do, they will change that on you during the Q&A and say, yeah, you recommended MuleSoft. They don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars to spend on a middleware tool. What are you going to do? What are some other options? Then you have to think on your feet and come up with a different solution.
Nice. And that's one of the next things, and that explains so much to me. One of the feedback I got on whenever I asked my friends about hopping on the CTA journey, one, it's just a good goal to stay continuing education. It's a lot of exams and study, but I've had a lot of really smart people with depth deeper than mine say, no, I don't want to do this. And it has to do with nerves around the panel experience. And that was very telling. And I think our group is going to pull up, I don't know if I ran this across you, but a Fight Club type thing at the end of every one of our sessions. We're just going to pick 2 people. All right, you're the panel, you're the invitee, and you have to, and we'll let people volunteer for that, but just to get used to being on the hot seat and drilling. And so it sounds like that might be a really important part of this whole process, is to get in that hot seat and start being the spooling architect, delivering solution guidance, and be ready to pick up the challenges.
Yeah, let me react to that a little bit. It is so critical that you have practice doing exactly what you're going to do in the review board before the day of. It needs to be muscle memory for what you're going to do as soon as you walk in that room, or when you turn on your camera and start going for the review board. It is nerve-wracking. I can tell you that when I took it, I was already 9 years into my Salesforce journey. I had just rolled out a 10,000 user org globally, and it is by far the most nerve-wracking and hardest thing I've ever done in my career. I'm a managing director at Accenture now. CTA was harder. So it's because of the pressure that you're under. Like you said, it's kind of a contrived scenario where you're never going to have 2 or 3 hours to solution what could be a $10 million program, right? But they're trying to see how well you know the material and how well you can think on your feet. So if I think about the nerves part of it, you could be the best technologist out there. You could be be able to spend 2 days on a scenario and have a perfect solution, beautiful diagrams, no issues at all. But if you can't do that on the day of, you're not going to pass. So you need to get to the point where you've done it so many times that it just becomes second nature, and you're still going to likely be nervous on the day of, and that's okay. I just had 2 of my candidates from my team go to the review board this week, and nerves. I mean, we don't have the results yet, but nerves play a huge role in the outcomes of your experience. I will say though, most people don't pass on the first attempt. They're getting that percentage, and I can't talk to the actual percentages, but that percentage is getting way better because of all the resources that are available now. When they started this thing back in 2011, I think it was, there were very few resources to try to prepare for the review boards. There's a lot more resources now, so that pass rate is getting up significantly. But from an overall perspective, I wouldn't get down on yourself if you don't pass on the first attempt. They're trying to make it more realistic so that you go when you're ready rather than go when you think you have to go race to find a slot. But it's important to note that just because you don't pass on the first attempt, if that's what ends up happening, don't get down on yourself. It's just another milestone for you to go and continue trying to go for it. I've seen people that put in a ton of work getting ready for the review boards, and then they don't pass for whatever reason. Maybe it was the day of performance. I mean, you hear that in entertainment and things like that all the time, where you just had an off day. That's fine. And I would just encourage anybody in that situation to just pick yourself back up and continue down the path, practice, and you'll eventually get there, hopefully.
And as a side note, everybody, there is now an option to take a class for the mocks via Salesforce, where you can go in and take a practice mock, which is a mock review board. And would you recommend taking that? I know that I signed up to take it, and I'm thinking it'll be helpful. Yeah.
There's actually 2 classes. So there's CTA 601, which is historically it's been a 2-day class. When they've been doing it virtually, it's been a 3-day, multiple hours per day.
Right.
Kind of thing.
Yeah.
That one is about the logistics of the exam and a couple of mini scenarios. CTA 602 is, I think, what you're talking about, which is a one-on-one mock scenario with an existing CTA, and they'll give you feedback individually on where you're at. So yes, I highly recommend it. In both of them actually would be fantastic.
And 601 is great for those of you that haven't taken it. You end up leaving with ideas about how you're supposed to do your flows, how you're supposed to do your diagrams, the idea of the structure of the test. You run through the structure a few times so you feel more confident about it. You get a bunch of resources. I haven't taken the mock one yet though, so that's still coming up soon. But yeah, and that one's new, so very excited.
Yep, for sure. And there's a bunch of options out there too in the ecosystem. So several of the partners, I know we do it. Some of the other bigger partners have CTA programs that are, if you have CTAs or have mentors that are available in the community. I know Ladies Be Architects does this. Flow Republic has a solution for this, for coaching. To have people do these one-on-one mocks or group mocks to get feedback as you're going through your process of learning what works for you. Because I think it's really important to note that you can't just take what worked for somebody else as the way to pass the exam. It doesn't work that way. There's going to be your presentation style, your ability to communicate. I've seen some people where they do everything in PowerPoint because they're super proficient in generating really good content in PowerPoint quickly. other people that use whiteboards or flip charts for their diagrams, other people that can, like my buddy Carl Brundage, I'm sure you guys know him. He did his exam where he walked in and did all of his diagrams freehand on the whiteboard during his presentation. Not many people can do that. And that's not necessarily something that you should try. So it's really using your process before you get to the review board to figure out exactly what you're going to do and what works for you. There is no prescription on, well, if you use a whiteboard, if you handwrite your diagrams, you're not going to pass. That's not the case.
And I'm going to break in right now. So Andy, we had people flip out when we announced you on the call, or to be if you're at the group. A team, I think there may be something wrong with our invite. I think we've heard from a couple people that they got blocked at the lobby and gave up trying for a while. So just apologizing for the turnout, Andy. And I think we'll be making a lot of hay out of the recording. I know a lot of people will want to hear all of this. So this is just fantastic. And
sure.
We're finding people pinging us on different channels if I can't get in. So anyway, sorry, that's what I'm scrambling behind the scenes trying to do, and we all are. So sorry about that.
No
Can I
problem.
ask a quick question?
Sure.
So you mentioned earlier that if there's a topic or something where you don't have a lot of experience, to kind of admit it and move on and use your precious time. Would you say that that's kind of like an automatic fail then? Or how does the review board really view that?
Yeah, so the review board scoring, I'm not going to get into like super details, but in general, think of the review board as the same thing as the prerequisites. So the scoring is all done by domain, and they doing poorly in one domain doesn't necessarily mean, well, let me take that back. So if you fail a domain, it's not likely you're going to pass the overall exam. However, they have the concept of a partial pass. So you can pass a, I think now actually they changed it so that you can have two section fails and still come back and do a retake of just that section. So they'll give you a scenario that is focused on DevOps or focused on identity and access management or large data volumes or whatever it happens to be. But I think it's important to note that if you do have a section fail, the scenario you're going to be given to prove that you know that is going to be so focused on that, it's going to be super, super deep. So I wouldn't necessarily go into it saying, I'll just pass everything else and then deal with it with a section retake later on. You want to have pretty good confidence that you're going to be able to pass all of the areas. Where I think that it's important to not try to fake it is when you have like a specific thing, like maybe you were given a requirement and you said, I'm going to use field service lightning for this, and you have no experience in field service lightning, right? That's okay. This exam is not necessarily testing you on field service lightning specifically, but you do need to understand any of the solutions that you come up with. So if you say field service lightning as part of your solution, be ready for some deep questions about it. If you get to a point where it's beyond your knowledge, that's okay. Just say, I know that this is the capability that I would use. I would surround myself with team members that have this background. This is the right technical solution. I can't go super deep into the specific question that you're asking me about it, right? So that's what I mean by just don't try to fake it. Okay.
So it sounds like you still need a pretty well-rounded idea of all of the different clouds that are out there before you attempt to take your boards, so that you can at least give that high level about each area and know enough about each product to be able to give, the right solution out, even if you're going to be saying a team member would have to help you.
Yep. Yeah. I would say that it's outside of the core platform. It's more about what are the capabilities of the various areas, they want to know that you know that Heroku exists and what I would use it for, or that Salesforce has MuleSoft and what I would use that for versus some other less expensive or less capable product that might be out there. Maybe you make an assumption that they already have Del Boomi, or maybe they already have Workato, or whatever it is. But you need to know that that capability exists, and under what circumstances would you use it.
Sorry, Andy, if I can add on this, because this is an interesting topic indeed, because actually I did a mock, I think 2 weeks back or something, and I proposed field service because it really, the scenario was so geared towards it, and I was like, yeah, it should solve it. But then indeed during the Q&A, I noticed, yeah, of course, I still have major gaps there. And the advice that I got from Seb, who was judge at that time, was that it's really important to know the different products that are out there, know the data model and how they work, so that you have an idea of what this industry solution can do. But if you don't really know the details too well, which is something that even if you have certificates, something, you know, you may not have the hands-on to defend it or justify it, then it's safer to just go for a custom solution, leveraging maybe some of the capabilities that you know are in the Salesforce product. Do you agree with this?
I do agree. I think that it's one of those areas where you could even say in your presentation that this might be a fit for Field Service Lightning, but it's not. I'm going to make an assumption that the client doesn't want to pay for those licenses, or I'm going to make an assumption that, well, you could just say that I am making an assumption that they want to do things that are a little bit more custom than what the core product supports, and therefore I'm going to do this other custom solution. Definitely safer if you feel like you can talk to it at a deeper level, because if you, like I said before, if you bring up a particular product area, you need to be ready to answer deep questions about it. It is good for you to say, yeah, I know that Field Service Lightning exists, and I'm not selecting that option because of XYZ. It's probably not the best thing to say. I'm not selecting it because I don't know anything about it. But as you're talking about it, you can say, I think that there's going to be requirements that pop up based on my experience that it can't support, and so I'm going to go with XYZ. So I think that I agree with Seb that it's a safer move to talk about something that you know about versus something that you don't, as long as you can justify it. It all comes back to the justification for why you chose what you chose. Because I'm assuming that everybody on this call right now has some level of experience dealing with complex requirements that have multiple options for selecting a choice, right? There is usually not one right answer. And I will tell you that the little hidden secret of the CTA is that the judges learn stuff all the time when they're judging, right? There's a different way of thinking about a particular requirement, and the judges didn't think about that. That's why there is no actual solution key. There's some guidance on what we should be looking for when you're judging a scenario, but there are multiple right answers, and what you're looking for is what is the optimal answer given the constraints that candidate understands and their ability to communicate what their solution is for whatever that particular set of requirements were. So it's not like the multiple choice test where there's a right answer. It's there could be multiple, and that's why being a judge, I think, is actually harder than doing the scenarios, because you have to be able to understand what the candidate is thinking about how they interpreted those requirements, and then coming up with different questions related to it. If you ever have the opportunity to in your mock practices, like if you're doing a group scenario or something like that, and you get to act as a judge, even if you're not a CTA, totally fine. take the opportunity, because the process of thinking about what a judge might need to think about will help you with your presentation and your solutioning, because it'll force you to think like, what are the questions that I need to be able to ask, or what are the questions the judges are going to answer or ask me, and you can build those answers directly into your presentation ahead of time. So
Great.
take that opportunity if it ever comes up.
Thanks so much, Andy. And I have done this indeed, play a judge. And also, I mean, I think it's something that you get to know your own gaps. So of course, when you do mocks as a presenter, obviously you run into a lot of gaps, or I still have anyway. But also as a judge, you know, sometimes someone is explaining something, and yeah, it's just such a valuable experience. So yeah, I highly recommend. We have, by the way, I'm part of the Benelux study group. I don't know if you heard of them. So we do bi-weekly mocks. So if anyone is interested, just, you know, let me know and I'll get you in touch with one of the organizers.
That's
Thank
great.
you, Andy.
Thanks, Elif. All right, so I had a next question queued up. So you mentioned App Exchange. And I'm just going to keep going, team, with my questions so that there's no lull. Does anybody else pop up? The open forum, open mic, raise hand and or don't, and just go. But for App Exchange, you mentioned that as one of the components of your solution. Do I need to go out and have experience with a couple dozen App Exchange apps, or just know that they're out there, know when there might be something that I could solve, and say I'd go research and find out a tool? What's the depth and breadth of that piece of the expectation?
That is a very good question. There is an expectation that you have some level of familiarity with App Exchange apps. The ones that usually will come up are going to be related to some sort of e-signature requirement, or document generation, or payment processing, things of that nature. Here, what I see too often is a candidate comes across a very complex requirement, maybe it's OCR, something like that, and they solve it by saying, and I'm going to use an App Exchange package for that, and move on. And every single time that happens, we come back in the Q&A and say, okay, you said you're going to use an App Exchange package for that. Which one and why? Because you can't just you can't throw out that you're going to have somebody else solve your problem for you without knowing who you're going to go talk to solve that problem. You're making an assumption that there's an App Exchange product out there to do something, but if you don't have direct experience with it, or at least know that it exists by name, it's not a valid solution for your requirement. So you may know that I'm not going to do OCR on the platform. That's not a thing that I should be doing on platform, but who would I talk to, right? Like what product would I go? E-signature is a great example, right? I know that I could do that in Field Service Lightning to a limited degree with the mobile app. I could write a custom component that lets me capture a signature. I could go to the App Exchange and get DocuSign or EchoSign or whatever. But whatever you choose, you just need to have justification for, as long as it's something specific. So just make sure you're not solving it by throwing it over the wall and saying that, yeah, I don't know how to solve it, so I'm going to let somebody else solve it for me. That's not going to be good enough. They're going to ask you a question on that if you use that technique. But there is not an assumption that you're super deep on every App Exchange product out there, right? There's going to be a couple. They want to know that you're going to evaluate the buy versus build decision when you're solving for some of these requirements. But there is no assumption that you have deep hands-on experience with a specific App Exchange product.
Sorry, Andy, and a follow-up question on this one. I'm sorry, Paul.
No, go ahead.
It's an interesting. I'm so happy to have Andy, at the tips of my fingers to ask all my questions. So I've heard also that for these app exchange products, you might need to know a bit about the licensing model. How do you see this?
Potentially, that one's tricky. I don't think that you do actually need to know deep licensing things, because that changes all the time, right? And that's not something Salesforce controls. It could be based on license, and honestly, depending on the size of company that you're working with, licenses are all custom anyways. Like most of the clients that I deal with, doesn't really matter what it says on the app exchange, what the price is. It's going to be some flavor of a custom license that is suited for that particular client. So if you're getting advice that you need to know about how it's licensed, I would disagree. I would say you're looking at it more from a capability perspective. And now that's specific to the app exchange product. Salesforce, you do need to know about licensing. But I don't think you need to go that far for the app exchange side of things. A bonus if you do,
thank you.
But I don't think you need, it's not a requirement.
That's really a relief. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Hey Andy, I have one basic question which I struggle sometimes.
Yep.
And maybe after coming India is not getting, but sometimes I feel that I'm mixing the concept, and sometimes I feel that I don't remember the terms, like, okay, this was the license related stuff. This is the now I should use Visual Force Page and Aura component with these kind of requirements. Sometimes I really don't remember the things which I observe, and I'm trying to understand is because that nature of, because I'm not doing architect work, one reason, or it's more on study side.
So
I feel like how I should remember the things. Mainly, I should do every day 30-minute study, or like do something else. I mean, I'm a little bit nervous with that part.
that is entirely experience. You will, that's not something that you can study. There are decision guides, there are best practices and things of that nature, but ultimately it comes down to, how did I solve it before? How did I work with somebody who solved it a certain way? Like when you're in the throes of a P1 production issue and you need to go solve a problem that crept up on you due to large data volume, or crept up on you because there was a security issue that you didn't take into account when you started the design, and now it's out there and you need to fix it. The experience of that stress and coming up with options and figuring out how to do it, that's more like what the CTA exam is, right? You can recall that on the top of your head because it was a traumatic memory, and it's something that you actually did, versus you read about it somewhere and now it's just memorization of these are the options. So it's really going to be back to that. You need the experience to be able to pass this exam, versus you need to be able to go and, I mean, like all the architect decision guides that are out there now, those are great. Like I wish they had those resources when I was going through this process, but where you're really going to benefit from them is in your day-to-day job. And then that is what is going to kind of trigger the processes in your brain to remember them, is using them on a daily basis versus remembering them and not having had done hands-on. So you need to get into projects that are going to give you that experience, is what it boils down to.
So it's more on experience, not more on giving the time to study guide, which I feel, because I did many times study, but I forgot sometimes. Even I wrote on the board, but I actually don't remember when I try to solve it.
Yep. Honestly, I think experience is more important than all the certifications. Like, I don't want to downplay the importance of all of the prerequisite certifications, because they are super important to make sure you have that foundation level of book knowledge, I guess I'll say. But it doesn't compare to experience. And that's really where we need to set expectations with candidates that it's not about that you, in a year, you blew through and got 20 certifications from Salesforce, right?
Right.
It's that you took that knowledge and now you've built a body of experience based on it. And now you can prove that you've done it by doing the review board. It's unlike any other certification out there.
Thank you.
Andy, can
That's
I
why,
ask?
that's why it's valuable, by the way.
Andy, this has come up in various conversations, the difference between book smarts and experience and practice. And I think what I'm curious about is what type of environment, so we can do study groups, we can have calls like these that are super helpful. There are lots of resources, people can play in dev orgs and things of that nature. But how do we help people, what are some of the best ways people can continue to get experience? Is consulting, for example, one of the main paths to a variety of scenarios? Is it the only path? I'm just kind of curious from what you're seeing and where the candidates come from, what do their backgrounds look like so that we can all, as we're thinking about our careers too,
Yep.
Sort of have different thoughts.
Sure, for sure. So I will say that it is easier to get the level of experience needed for this as a consultant, only because you are seeing so many different things. However, you could be a consultant on one project for 2 years, and it's the same thing as if you were employed at the company, right? So if you're trying to do this more quick, get experience more quickly, I think that being a consultant across multiple shorter engagements actually does help. I will say that when I got the CTA, I had just come off of, I want to say I had done 4 implementations, working on my 5th, first one as a consultant. So over the course of my Salesforce career, I'd gone from a small customer to a very large customer to finally going into consulting. And I had, maybe it was 2 projects in consulting under my belt when I actually went to the review boards. And it was important to have those experiences across the spectrum of the kinds of clients or kinds of customers that are using Salesforce, because you need to be able to say, how are all the different ways that you can use Salesforce? If you've only been at one customer your entire Salesforce career, unless you're using every product out there in multiple ways, it's going to be very difficult to pass this exam. So that's why I say that it's a little bit easier. It's not impossible. You can absolutely do it, but you have to be able to get the experience. And the ways that you get experience besides consulting could be going out and working with a nonprofit, right? They have the very same kinds of challenges depending on the size of the nonprofit. You could go work with them to do an implementation, work on a specific issue. Maybe they're trying to do an integration with a payment provider or something like that. And you can go volunteer to help build that out. And you can use that as an opportunity to get some of the hands-on experience that you're not getting in your day-to-day job. I think that as you get more and more complex, there's going to be customers that are really stretching the boundaries of the platform. And in those kinds of customers, it definitely is a little bit easier because the CTA is really about understanding how far can you push it, right? If you're in a small environment, not many users, you're just doing a Sales Cloud implementation, you have 0 community cloud experience, 0 large data volumes. And by large data volumes, I mean tens of millions of records. It's going to be hard to get the hands-on experience necessary to pass this exam. And that's okay. Like, I want to be clear, while there's a huge push and everybody is really excited about CTA, it's not for everybody, right? There's a few hundred of us right now, and I think there's definitely room for a lot more, and the overall ecosystem needs more architects, but I don't want it to come across as like CTA, it's all or nothing, because that's why application architect exists. That's why system architect exists. It's why they're doing B2C architect and B2B architect, because there are multiple kinds of architects that are needed across the ecosystem. And CTA just happens to be kind of the conglomeration of all of them together.
And so CTA isn't, you know, the end all be all, kind of like you're saying. It's just one of the many paths. And, you know, just kind of to be clear that it's not the path for everybody. It's the path to take if you are passionate about that, everything on the platform, and if that's what you want to do. There's nothing wrong with not going CTA. It's just the path if you want to go CTA.
Correct. Yep. And again, if you don't have the experience, it's going to be hard to get there, and that's okay. It might not be the right path for you, or it might not be the right path for you yet. I want to make sure that it comes across that the like Salesforce actually recommends that you have 8 years of Salesforce experience as an architect before you go to the review board. So I look back, I started as an admin, right? I was one of the first 500 certified admins out there. And I didn't code until maybe eight years into my Salesforce journey. So you can absolutely do it. You can make the transition, but it's not for everybody, and that's okay. There's lots of room in the ecosystem for all kinds of roles. But if it is something that you're interested in pursuing in terms of the CTA, you got to go deep and you got to go wide, and you need hands-on experience doing all of it.
That's great. Yeah, there's a lot of, because the market is opening up so quickly and people are wanting to get in, and certifications seem to be the entry point. You must have this certification. Well, certifications, you're supposed to be in a role for about 2 years before you even tried them. And well, you can't get in without having a cert. You can't get experience without being in, and it's like everybody's caught in a catch-22. So there's a little bit of an economy of, I need to pass certs to show that I know anything. And people start targeting them. I'm going to go get certified in field service lightning so I can get a job as field service lightning person, and not vice versa. I've been in there for a while. And so CTA is definitely one of those. This is a feather in your cap because you've already done it, and you have to have already done it before you can really expect to be able to go in and just solve everything academically. There's not going to be a trailhead for how to do everything and know it. And you've got to have at least that much, a good amount of experience to come up with a good amount of intertwined solutions. And it's not an A or B. So I think that's a huge clarification that we need to continue to sell as we, our group targets architects, and we architects that are seeking CTA, but this is not an exam study group. This is, if you're in an architect role at the beginning of your architect journey, hopefully this is resources. And if you are well into your architect journey, I'm in a weird spot because I've been an architect in every technology stack out there except for Salesforce. So I'm still kind of learning my Salesforce stuff, but I'm doing that. And the CTA is probably still a good bit away from me, even though 5 years in, dabbling with it. It's the depth in there and bringing that background and breadth. So yeah, no, this is a great clarification. And Andy, I wanted to ask before anybody else.
And really quick on certifications, it kind of, one thing that people often hear me say, and I think my team hears me say it quite often, as well as everyone where I work, is certifications are not Pokemon. You do not need to catch them all. If you are out there just trying to collect certifications and certification numbers, CTA is probably not for you. You've got to have that passion, in my opinion, and that true desire to want to learn it and be all about it. Not sure about your opinion there, but it's not about just getting the cert. It's about truly having a passion for it, in my mind. Sorry, continue on.
Yeah, sorry. And my question was, Andy, we've had you at just over an hour now. Do you have time to go further with us? Okay,
Yep.
Great. Yeah, definitely wanted to ask. I know the questions are starting to pile in. So thank you. I'll target another 20 minutes before we close and go for final questions, if you're okay with that as we keep
Yeah,
going.
for
I know
sure.
my notes are
I do
streaming out.
want to address the question or the comment about Pokemon. I completely agree. If you go look at the search that I have like less than 10, which I am totally okay with, right?
Shame, shame. No, I'm just kidding.
Heck yes.
You want
I
to
love-
know? You want to know what the real shame is? And it's on my priority list for the next 30 days. I don't even have Ranger yet on Trailhead.
What?
This call is over.
I know, right? I will have it in the next 30 days. That's my commitment. But it's because that I do lots of things that are not really certifications, and they're not really like, let me tell you about the certification that I'm actually working on right now. I'm working on the cloud security certified professional. It's not Salesforce related, right? It is security focused for cloud systems that has a very big overlap with what I do day to day. But it's not a Salesforce certification, and that's okay. Like I don't need to be 20x certified, 25x, 27, whatever it is, right? There's the Salesforce ecosystem has gotten so big at this point that nobody is going to have every single one. And if they do, they're probably just getting it to get it, and they're not using it day to day. Because they're just, it's so big that even in the largest partners, I work for the largest Salesforce partner out there, and we don't have anybody that does everything, right? There's always going to be specialists. And to me, certification is prove that you know that you're deep in an area. And if you're going out and let's use identity and access management as an example. I hear a lot of people struggle with identity and access management as they're working their way towards CTA, right? It's one of the harder ones, but why is it harder? Because you don't do it every day. Usually there's a dedicated team at a company that does identity. And from a Salesforce perspective, you're maybe following their instructions on how to hook up their IDP as a identity provider for Salesforce, right? It takes 20 minutes to do that, and you do it once and then you're done. And especially if you're on a customer side of things, you may do that once 10 years ago and you're done, right? So it's very difficult to get that hands-on experience unless you specialize in that, like I do, right? I specialize in security. So I'm doing OAuth and SAML stuff on a daily basis, which is why that one I helped write, and it was easy because it wasn't something that was foreign to me. It's something that I do every day. If I was I'll just come out and say I don't do CPQ at all, and I have teams of people that are CPQ experts. It's not something that I feel like I need to be an expert in because I have people to do that. From a capability perspective, I absolutely want to know about when would I use a particular product over another, under what circumstances would I need to put in CPQ, but do I need to be certified in CPQ? Not unless I'm going to go do a bunch of CPQ projects, right? So, and right now I'm not doing that. So I view this as, for me, platform and security is kind of the big things that I want to be focusing on. And so those are the kinds of certifications that I'm working with, rather than trying to go and get everything, because you can't. It's just, you can't. I shouldn't say that. There's going to be somebody that comes back and says, yeah, I have all of them, like my buddy here, Bowden. But it's one of those things where, like, you're not gonna actually use that on a day-to-day basis most of the time. There could be a rare example where that's the case, but I don't think that should be the goal. I don't think that going out and making it say that you're 27x certified is the everybody needs to go do that. because it's which certifications you actually have and how are you using the knowledge that you gained during that certification journey.
So question, Andy, what about certifications that aren't Salesforce related? So you mentioned you're working on some security stuff. I know I've been working on my Snowflake certifications.
Yep.
How do those help in CTA? Do they help? Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. They help. It comes down to the role that you play in your organization. So CTA is just a credential, right? A lot of people conflate that with CTA being a role. Usually the more senior architects are going to be the ones that have the CTA credential. And by definition, the more senior architects are kind of putting all the pieces of an enterprise together. So having certifications in other technologies, absolutely. Like after I do my security stuff, I'm going to go do a whole bunch of AWS stuff because
Nice.
There's a major market for how do all these cloud technologies play together, right? It's not just Salesforce. And Salesforce is, I'm not going to go there. There's quite a few things going on where how do we plug Salesforce into the bigger enterprise picture? And at one time, that's kind of what CTA was meant to be, is to be that certification that covered all things Salesforce, all things that could go into the overall enterprise. And they've focused it a little bit on core platform just because of all the acquisitions and the strategies they've been taking with growth. So I don't think that CTA is the be all end all. It's definitely the pinnacle of Salesforce certifications, but to round out yourself as a technologist, seeing how the other enterprise technologies affect your Salesforce implementations is I think a really good step to take. I'm not a Salesforce fanboy in the sense that that I think that you can solve every problem with Salesforce. There are problems that you can't solve with Salesforce, and
Absolutely.
that's okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Nice.
Right on. Yeah,
Thank
that's
you
great.
so much.
So next question. So I bragged on and pitched and talked about Ladies Be Architects as one of the places you sent the architects to go find the learning that would help contribute to your CTA path. Do you have other places that you send people to learn architecture skill set? And now we're kind of talking beyond Salesforce certification, but more architect mindset. And building the architect resume. I keep CISSP exam pending and quotes on my resume to show that I'm working on broader certificate stuff, but I've never found the justification for spending $1,000 to go prove that to somebody to have that there. It's more like that feather in your cap. Yes, I am broad. Yes, I keep up with a wide variety of security topics. No, passing an exam doesn't particularly do anything for any field that I've been in because it's been embedded in other stacks. Where it helps, it should show where my perspective is. So what other things can we dip into to help increase and have that architect mindset and those specific feathers that help distinguish you from starting your journey to advanced in your journey and or keeping up with topics that would make you a better CTA candidate?
So let me address this by two ways. First is the external, and then I'll talk a little bit about what I'm doing. So from a external perspective, there are things like TOGAF, right? You could get involved with. The CISP that you're talking about, that's on my list too, after the cloud. It's from the same organization, actually, the cloud.
Oh, it is ISC2. Yeah.
Yep.
You can have my Sean Harris book. I'll send it to you.
Yeah. The issue with those, I think those are actually even harder than CTA because you have to have existing certified individuals vouch for you and sponsor you to get that certification. So, and you have to have been in the ecosystem. Like a practitioner for 5 years to be able to get that kind of a certification. So again, book knowledge isn't enough, even in those cases. Those are like the pinnacle of certification in that space. From my perspective, what I'm focusing on is Accenture being as big as it is, we've got all kinds of architecture classes and internal certifications and things like that. So beyond TOGAF and some of the CISP stuff, the IC2 certifications and things like that, I personally am not doing anything beyond that kind of stuff. I will say that if you look at the new Architects website from Salesforce, they introduced a concept they called SOGAF, which is like the Salesforce equivalent of TOGAF.
Okay, nice.
So you could definitely look at that. There's some reference architectures and some really good content that's coming out in that space. But like I said, from a personal perspective, I'm doing a bunch of our internal architecture related classes and internal certifications, just because we have whole teams of people that are doing AWS and GCP and Azure and whatever else it is that I want to get involved with. So that's what I'm doing.
So what is SOGAF something that's popping up outside of Accenture, or is that an internal? Was there a resource that you could point us to that?
No, so SOGAF is actually Salesforce. So
okay,
on the architects.salesforce.com, that there's a bunch of new content out there. I think it's a concept that actually Salesforce themselves are putting out.
Nice. Yeah. Whenever I keep poking the True to the Core team about architect resources, this architects.salesforce.com I don't think was out there or heavily utilized. They kept pointing me to Medium, and there's a Medium link that has all the content.
I think most of the content is making its way. So Zane is really taking the bull by the horns and moving things over to a centralized space. If you haven't met Zane and you're on your journey, you should definitely go talk to Zane Turner. She's been doing awesome with leading up the architect relations group at Salesforce.
And she's very welcoming and she is always down to chat. So don't hesitate to reach out.
Yep.
Well, can I squeeze in another question?
Absolutely. We're kind of at the end of mine. So everybody hit it there or forever hold your peace until the next time we bring Andy forward.
Okay, yeah. Hopefully that'll be soon, but for this question, I don't want to wait that long. So one of the things that I've noticed is when I'm, reading some of these mock scenarios, there are just some industry specific business cases that I don't have experience with. So I work for a consultancy company and I've had the opportunity to work for some different industries, so that's cool. But there was this one example, I think it was the scenario written by Jakob, where it's about parcels and how they are, going to these specific locations and then people pick them up there, and it was so foreign to me. The concept doesn't really exist even in this format in my country, so it was just so foreign. So is there any, are there any industry specific flows or business processes that you would recommend we take a look at to just know a bit more about common business scenarios we could face?
So in a real scenario, in something that Salesforce is going to put out, they actually do reviews to make sure that it is going to be fair to those that don't have either the industry or cultural background related to whatever the requirements might be. That said, there are situations where you're going to need to understand the implicit requirements. So like there might be requirements about it's a global implementation. There's business units in the UK, in Germany, in China, and in the US, or something like that. And you need to take into account that, okay, we've got GDPR in play. We might have CCPA in play if it's in California. We might have data residency requirements as it relates to China. So that all is going to come from experience. It's not going to be something that you necessarily go see in a Salesforce trailhead, right? There might be some trailheads on that topic, but it's going to be one of those things where it's not explicitly talked about, but they expect that you understand that these kinds of regulatory concerns exist. They may not make you go super deep on any of them, but just know that, okay, if I've got a situation with, let's say, Germany and the US, I may have data residency concerns and I may need to do a multi-org strategy, or I might need to use some sort of tokenization technology like Cipher Cloud or a CASB or something like that. So that's where I say it's, if all of those terms I just used are completely foreign to you, that is an indication that you're going to need to get experience with some of the larger enterprise concepts. So I don't want to make it sound like you have to be like a GDPR expert or something like that, but you need to know it exists and you need to know what are some of the strategies for dealing with it.
Can I make a statement? And I know you probably won't be able to agree with it, but you can either disagree with it. But the CTA is not for enroll architects. It is really the experience that it requires. You either have to have been enroll in a wide variety of places or had the kind of exposure that you get as a consulting architect to be exposed to the different models, different solutions, and so forth. You're not going to pick it up as I have been an architect for 8 years around Salesforce, around my solution or the things that have sprung up in my work case. And I know that's a harsh thing to say, but I think I'm kind of getting the picture that that's fair based on the breadth you're expected to have.
So I'm not going to come out and say that as a hard and fast rule, but I will say that it is easier to work on this exam if you have those other experiences. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair. And that's one of my favorite opportunities of this group and those like it, that I may not have experience with Jitterbit or an ETL tool that connects between it. I've just never had to deal with it in my consulting experience, but I can come here and gain secondhand knowledge, share it, and be able to get an appreciation for it enough to say, I could go in, and if that seemed to be a part of the solution, I could say, yes, I know this, it does that, but I'm not very deep on it because I haven't implemented it before. Conceptually, here's where it is, and here are the gotchas, because I can synthesize experience by sharing it with others.
Yep, I think that makes perfect sense.
Great. All right, anybody else?
The other thing I will say is that even if you don't have that experience now, the Salesforce ecosystem is so dynamic. I mean, I'm not sure about everybody that's on this call, but I know that a lot of my friends and a lot of my contacts have made their way across multiple companies in their Salesforce career. So even though you might be in role and doing something today as an architect on a large application or something that you've been the owner of for the past 10 years or whatever it is, who knows what's going to happen. You might end up somewhere else down the road and you can get that level of experience. And I don't want to necessarily say, don't go down the CTA journey just because of that, just because you're an enroll architect. So I think that there's definitely opportunity, just it's going to require that experience. And the easiest way to acquire that experience is to have lots of experiences.
Absolutely.
Nice.
Great advice. Team, anybody else have any other closing questions they want to
I
get
have
in?
one question. I'm sorry I joined late. Maybe I have missed it already. So I heard you saying that you cannot deep dive in everything, like for CPQ and other products or other clouds probably. But when you go for a CTA, you never know which kind of scenario you are going to get, and probably we have to use CPQ as one of the solution, but and there might be a lot of questions coming from the judges because you never know what kind of questions that they are going to ask, So how would you deal with that? If no doubt, because even I myself, being a consultant, I am not working with CPQ at all because the consultancy I am in is only working with the Commerce Cloud and Marketing Cloud, where they don't use the CPQ or any other products. But then I'll never get an exposure to the CPQ, and how would you deal with the questions that the judges are going to ask them?
So we covered a little bit of this, but I would say that you need to have an understanding of capabilities when it's outside of the core platform. From a CPQ perspective, it's becoming part of the core platform, so you might need to get a little bit more experience with it. But from a dealing with an area, maybe I'll tackle the question more generally. Dealing with the areas that you don't have a lot of experience with is just be upfront about it. Don't try to go after faking it. Don't try to don't dig yourself a hole, basically. So if you don't know something, or it's something that you are not familiar with, they're going to find that out anyways, and just deal with it. It might be a situation where you say, yeah, I don't have hands-on experience with that particular area. I would need to go do a little bit more research, or I would need to pull in one of my team members that's an expert in that space. Because they all know, they're all CTAs. They all know that you don't go deliver a program by yourself, right? It's especially for as large a program as would be for the scenarios. So you do need to understand capabilities. If you're going to talk to it, be ready to talk deep about it. But if you can't, just be upfront about it. And if it ends up being a critical area that you have no experience with, yeah, that might mean you don't pass this time around. But at least you'll know that that's an area that you need to be focused on and go after it the next time.
Yeah. Okay. I have one more question. Sorry, if I may. Yeah. So I heard a lot of time that there, so when you're given a scenario, there are a lot of assumptions that you need to take, right? Because there's no one to clear your doubts. So what's the scope of those assumptions? It's like certain things I cannot assume, or I can, like how broad I can go, how deep I can go in the assumptions.
So you can make an assumption about anything that's not documented. So there's going to be a bunch of background information. There's going to be a bunch of information about existing systems, what their preferences for which systems might stay and which systems might go in a future state. And you need you should make assumptions and state them. As long as you're stating your assumptions, you're golden. State the assumption that you made. And as far as depth of the assumption, it really varies by which area you're talking about. It could be an assumption about the user base or the capabilities of a given technology. So like if they have an ERP system in this scenario that they say has it has a SOAP interface, a file-based interface, and they're working on a REST interface, you can make an assumption that I'm going to assume that by the time I get to building the integration with the ERP system, that the REST interface is going to be built, and we're going to take advantage of that. Like that would be an example of an assumption that you could make. They could in the Q&A say, yeah, but it doesn't align with your timeline. So the REST service is going to be a year out. What do you do now? So those are the kinds of assumptions you can potentially make. You can make assumptions about growth levels. If they don't specifically say I'm growing by 10% per year, then you could say on average, I'm assuming that we're going to have record growth of 5% per year, and therefore my object volume for cases is going to be 20 million records per year, and therefore I'm going to need a purging strategy or an archival strategy at this year, or I'm going to need to do some sort of indexing strategy, whatever it is, right? You can make those assumptions if they're not explicitly stated.
Yeah. Thank you.
Great, good questions, Ruti.
Thanks.
All right, so unless anybody has any dying ones to get in, that I think Andy is usually pretty responsive on Twitter, and I am happy to gather questions as we go forward, and beg your indulgence on continuing to advise us on architecture and CTA roles and drawing that distinction.
Sure.
Thank you very much. I think we'll close out right here. Meighan, do you have Dan, anything closing to add?
Nothing
just
other
wanna
than
say-
appreciation.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you so much, Andy, and everyone else for joining us. This was awesome. Really appreciate you being here, and thank you for the great information.
No problem. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, no,
Good luck
absolutely.
with your trailhead goals.
Yes.
I have
See,
more
I-
badges than you. I can't believe it. Oh my God.
I came out and I'm vulnerable to this group, right? Like that. There you go.
They're
Good
gonna
to
knock
see you.
Ranger out of the park. You got this.
You do it in your sleep, probably.
Outstanding. Well, yeah, wholeheartedly
Thanks.
thank you sincerely, Andy, for joining. This was great. I think this video is going to be like the foundation of our documentation for CTA fit for you and questions answered, and just around architecture in general. This is great. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks,
All
everybody.
right, thanks everybody for joining. Thanks, Jen. Thanks everybody.